All right, we're good to go.
We're good. All right, officially, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome.
Wait, hold up, Dale. Sharon, are we good to go?
Yes, fine. Yes.
Thank you.
Boy, and I already blew my best line.
Yeah.
All right, officially, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the City of Maitland City Council Workshop for August 12th, 2020. The workshop has now been called to order. Now, please note that this workshop is being held through video and audio conferencing technology. Ms. Maria, will you please call the roll and make sure all are present and ensure the council members can hear and be heard?
Councilman Wild.
Here.
Councilman Guthrie.
Here.
Councilwoman Hall Harrison.
Here.
Councilman Thomas, which he is. He just text messaged me. He's trying to get his microphone to work. Okay. Listening to us. Mayor McDonald.
Here. Okay, now in addition to the city council, we have City Manager Sharon Anselmo and Assistant City Manager Mark Ragantine joining us today. Now, Ms. Sharon, do you want to lead us in?
Sure. Just a reminder that as you're aware, the governor has extended Executive Order 20-69, waiving the requirement for an in-person quorum. A council member need not be present, physically present, as long as sunshine law requirements can be met. And this workshop is being recorded.
All righty. Thank you, Ms. Sharon. Without any further ado, Larry, Scott, you got something you want to share with us?
Yes. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, commissioners and administration of the City of Maitland. My name is Larry Adams. I'm the founding principal of ACI, and with me today is Scott Weber across the table, who is our design principal, been with us working over 20 years, and Caroline Aragani, also, who has worked heavily on this as one of our designers. So with your permission, we'd like to offer a summary of the report that you have received from ACI, and I would like to thank the city for the opportunity to collaborate once again. We know that there's been a lot of things happening in Maitland, and we're aware of them through some of our involvement with the city on a continuing service basis. I thought it'd be appropriate to also say that we are not today in any kind of a hurry. We're not trying to, leave without any question being answered or addressed. This is meant to be somewhat informal, and we appreciate the presence of two new commissioners first of all, congratulations. And secondly, there may be some questions that go back a little bit before you came onto the commission, although I'm sure you all have been very heavily involved both in the library and in what's going on in Maitland. I think it's probably a good idea to start by saying that the purpose of our involvement was really based on this evaluation, which started with the evaluation of the site feasibility of the existing library itself. We understand the importance of, making decisions that are involved with public land or public facilities, and what that does, it sets up the understanding that we want to be sure that we are not just talking about vision, but we're also talking about the reliability of what vision means and how that vision makes for a better tomorrow real. So there are facts that we have looked at and studied to make that a reliable evaluation. The real purpose of this evaluation is required by the city because the existing library site lacks the flexibility that would allow it to expand in an efficient manner. and probably should say proficient, not just in terms of function, but also in terms of cost. Our goal of this effort was to ensure that in years hence, the Maitland Public Library does not find itself in a similar position, although it's pretty visionary to think 124 years later that we're now kind of running out of land. So not a bad choice of a site in 1907. The real purpose also was to carefully collaborate. We are facilitators here to collaborate with the city and the library and to evaluate what is required to take action to select the best site possible for Maitland's library to move forward. This study indicates that the new Maitland Public Library could be placed on any of the 3 sites that we were given to look at and that are evaluated here today. Each site comes with its own set of limitations and opportunities. The question really today is where should the library be placed? So with that, I'd just like to highlight a couple things you're going to see. We're going to walk you through some things, but this criteria that we're going to use, it's again, opinions are not normally as reliable as factually oriented criteria. So the criteria was generated to create a guide for us. And I want to mention there was no one leaned in on ACI, not that anyone would, but in fact, we had several people involved at the office that no one knew really which site was best until we got to the end, and it wasn't necessarily the site we thought. So we don't have anything in this. We don't have any vested stake or interest other than to do a good job. So with that, I'd like to walk you through that, and I assume you all have the report with you. Would it be okay for me to go to a shared screen at this stage, at this point?
Yes, please do.
Yes, let me ask real quick. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great, okay. My daughter's using the computer for her Winter Park High School, so I'm trying to ad lib on the phone. So anyway.
Was that your question? I'm sorry.
No, I didn't have a question.
Oh, okay. Well then, Larry, please go ahead. You and Scott, go ahead.
This PDF. You need to share. Okay, we're putting it on the screen now. Hopefully you can see that, and I will go to a full screen mode. So this follows almost exactly what you have. We've added a page at the end that kind of summarizes some things, but so I'm not obviously going to read this, but we all know the importance of this history and of the library, and it is true that community is really understood by sometimes someone saying, well, gee, what is this community like? Well, show me your library and I'll show you your future. And we know that that's an important component here today. The table of contents, we're going to go through some of these in a little more detail, but I'd like to run through just a quick introduction. What's unusual, what's unique about Maitland is there's only a handful of community-owned libraries in the state of Florida and very few in the country. So you're one of a few where the community is really, and its library is really one. And the importance of that is it allows you to become very oriented and customized to your own community's needs versus, and I don't mean that it's bad or wrong, but versus a larger countywide system where you're one of many. And all the libraries are important, but we just wanted to point that out, that we think the mission here allows you to be very community-centric and driven. I know a lot of people talk about history and the influences of people that have come from other places. In Maitland, it's really real, and it's not made up or anything like that. But it's interesting that when you look at the people, some of that you see there, and there were many, many people, we just found it interesting when you go back to that original photograph there of the library, the 1907 library. It was referred to as the Library and Community Center. There were some pretty famous people involved that made that happen. And if you think about Claire Domerick, obviously we know Domerick Elementary and the importance of their involvement and how it always seems the ladies get involved sometimes to make things happen quicker than others. And a lot of credit goes to Claire Domerick, Mary Louise Curtis Bach, who came in and actually found Maitland and fell in love with it.
Are you done in the office? All right, let's go with Grace. Just tell me, honey. Just yes or no.
Well,
Mike,
I would prefer the office, but if you need it, this is fine.
You can use that.
go ahead, Larry.
So, okay, thank you. So with these people, the reason they're in here is because it was a big influence when you think about how the research studio and the arts and culture came into play. And to think that, you know, people like Mary Louise Curtis, who famous from Philadelphia, all these people highly educated, came in, you know, they founded and started the Ladies' Home Journal. Her husband, she married Mr. Bach, who was the editor of that magazine. And they go on to come to Florida and they build the Bach Tower, but with the landscape architect who did New York Central Park, who was, you know, I mean, a famous architect, Frederick Law Olmsted. And she is the one that backs this experimental artist who says, I need some land, you know, blah, blah, blah. And she gives them the money to buy the acres for the research studio, which is Andre Smith, whom you all know, and the Artist Colony in 1937. So these are pretty famous people. And Andre Smith goes on to, you know, what we see here today, and is a renowned, by the way, architect as well. He designed the Distinguished Cross for the Army and for the military. So these are famous people that really had influences and highly educated. So the fact they picked Maitland says a lot, and I think the fact that you all have kept that vision alive, that's kind of in the spirit of our inspiration and thinking on this today. The existing library site, you know, has been talked about, I know, for a while. There's been a lot of wonderful things done by the library. It is very impressive what the programs are, and families, and the way in which it has expanded over the years. The leadership and foresight of moving forward is now bringing together a new set of thoughts and ideas, but it is still going to be driven by the community. And one of the things that we want to reference again is that, and I know you know this, but briefly mention that the facilities assessment report, which was dated July 17, 2018, which was commissioned by the city, it's called the Borelli report, documented a lot of deficiencies, physical, functional, operational codes. I mean, you pretty much have it all there, set up a lot of liability issues to be resolved, and really became difficult. It becomes more and more difficult to fix, if you will, but there still are deficiencies there they're important to address. So what we realize is that the ability to make something better for tomorrow at that site is virtually impossible if you're going to address the needs of an evolving Maitland for its library. So with that, we were brought in and we did a study of that site, which I mentioned earlier, which showed that putting a garage and just trying to do anything there with expansion would not be possible, and it actually would become an eyesore. The photograph at the bottom is really, you know, not just the original library in the front there, but in 1959 the two wings were added on either side, north-south. And so when you think of that, we do believe that whatever happens in your decision making, should you pursue moving forward, that building, those components should be preserved and repurposed. And it is a great location. You can continue to own it or not. But what it does set up is it sets up a great location for private sector or potential other nonprofit organizations. And I mean, it could be a great small law office, a small company, whatever. So we do believe that history should be preserved. This insert at the top, where it says existing library land and facilities, represents the summary of the challenges that were presented back to the commission in January, and the findings, and the need to move forward with another site if the library is to successfully expand. The building program is a minimum 20,000 square feet. So when we looked at the 3 sites that we're going to go through here in a minute, all of those sites, we looked at a minimum of 20,000 square feet plus expansion, and a more detailed program, if this moves forward, would be completed after. It would be the first thing we would complete to be sure that we had an accurate, detailed program for the new library. The New American Public Library, I know a lot of you have maybe traveled or have heard about what's going on sometimes with this new movement. The Aspen Institute was one of the great leaders. They were in this area, were funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to create a new platform for disseminating knowledge. And they picked libraries around the country. And one of the things that we were fortunate enough was to be involved with them. And we actually brought them into a library here in Winter Park, which we were not the architect on, but we helped to facilitate a discussion about what was going on. So what's interesting about the future of libraries is that pre-COVID, there were dynamic changes happening. And the idea was to create really more of a community destination experience inside and outside, and to synergize not just the library that had to do with the book lending model, but more with the outside world being able to come in and connect and do many things in the library. It's not, if you've been to Barnes and Noble over in Orlando, you'll see students in there collaborating, working on projects. You'll see people teaching someone French. It's an amazing platform because it's free. And so the idea of what's going on is you'll see spaces of libraries getting larger, more natural light. We're going to see in the post-COVID, these changes accelerate into touchless technology apps. So you come in, get your book, and you can walk out and you've been checked out without having to ever go to the desk. Although I'm an older person, so I will tell you, I will still look for the card catalog and go make sure I'm not in trouble with my librarian. So I will probably want a checkout counter somewhere. But with all the things going on, the picture at the bottom is really interesting, because today the future of libraries is not necessarily go to the computer room, but to really walk into the library and be inside the technology and be connected with your devices. So it's changing rapidly into a place where people collaborate and use their own devices to connect.
I think it's important too to keep that top picture in your mind's eye as we go through the sites, because that type of 2-story curtain wall, glass lobby, or common space can be achievable in all 3 of the sites. So just keep memorize that picture, even the top one here too.
So people, place, and platform of the library become, not just about the books. They become spaces that people can basically go to do things. We are going to see more outside involvement as well, especially with children and families. Some libraries are actually putting fitness equipment into portions of it on a very simple basis to emphasize, health, wellness, and just places to do things. And then the retirees are living longer, and that's creating a need for them to relearn, to understand how technology works and to reinvent themselves. There's people that are doing business that are on the entrepreneur side, where people are meeting their customers. There are a lot of small businesses that are 1 or 2 people, and they really can't afford rent of an office space. So a lot of people are using libraries if they have the places for people to come in and co-work and use the benefits that are available there. So getting to the 3 sites, we know the 3 sites, but there's no order here of importance. We just started at the top. So this is the Horatio site we're going to talk about, Quinstrong and Lake Lily. And again, when we talk about this evaluation process, it's really important to know that while we're evaluating 3 different sites, there's really a qualitative component with degrees of being more or less suitable for a library, and then there's a quantitative component. And so, when we look at those 2 things, you will see those variables become, important, but in different ways. So zoning, building sizes, things like that are quantifiable. Things that might be, differently in terms of quality would be the actual intuitiveness of, whether it's on a lake or a park or visible to the street, or it offers synergies between other organizations. Those are things that we take into account, not just the technical aspect of it. So I'm just going to highlight a couple things here to just take you through. We have 7 categories or 7 different distinctive areas of criteria. Site size and geometry. If you see site features, you see what's written there. There's a comment to explain it, what it means. There are not any obvious features or existing uses that would hinder the site. That would be an important thing to know. Is there something that might prevent? At the end of the day, we all say, yeah, this is it, but then we realize that, hey, well, this can't happen for a long time, or there's some other complexities that just make it too complex to get it done in a certain period of time or to meet other requirements. Under comments, it says it's an important issue, but its minor issues also can be addressed by building design. So there are ways to solve that. And the importance of it, though, if you look on the far right with the blue, is from 0 to 10, 10 being the most important, 1 being the least important. We see that as an important aspect of a successful library. Flexibility is the #1 criteria, so that has a 10. And what we mean by that is that it's flexible in all kinds of ways. And that's really the way to future-proof. That means the floor plan can change. That means things can move. So the idea of building systems and structure being available is for flexibility is really, really key today. Moving on, infrastructure, access, sustainability. You'll see those categories in what we have listed there. Obviously, things like access to utilities, roads and right-of-ways, walkability, proximity to bike paths, sustainable. These are all what we think are the most critical, and all the sites have a good degree of that. So therefore, though they're important, we still know people are going to drive to this library. We don't see it being, something that everyone will walk. You all have done a great job with your master plan. It's very impressive. I mean, some of the early visioning that went on about Independence Lane, and that, they're thinking about back to the grocery store, and how that backside of Independence was one of the ugliest places where the trash was picked up, and what was back there wasn't something you wanted to see. Has turned into a very vibrant environment. So extending that, we know not just to where we're talking about maybe to go north, but in your master plan to go down towards Lake Lily, we commend you on that. But we want to talk about is things that are synergistic like that with the library. And there was comments made in the public meetings during those visioning periods of the master plan that we've read, that having a public anchor that really symbolizes Maitland is not just maybe about a library, but it's about any civic component. And you've started that with the new city hall. We also, and fire station, the visibility, libraries need to be visible. They need to be seen on the street, and they need to become part of the placemaking of the town or the space. Financial would be 2 big things there are the phasing. If we have to move or relocate the library, that's an added cost. If we were to join this with another site, would that be impacted in any way? Current ownership is there are some issues that we want to look at there and how they affect it. Doesn't mean that disqualifies anything. And the timing. There is one of the things that we have been talked about, have heard, is the idea of trying to look at a bond referendum for financing this library. So if there is a bond referendum timing for this coming vote in March, then that would be one of the things that we definitely consider critical. I'm going to turn it over to Scott right now. I know I've done a lot of talking here, so there may be questions, or you're welcome to interrupt at any time. Would you like to ask a few questions about what you've seen and heard, or how would you like to proceed?
Yeah, folks, do you have any questions at this point? Hearing none. Scott, get to it.
Yes, sir. Well, the first site we're going to look at is the Horatio Avenue site, and this would be the site right here, Right now, it's just used for some overflow parking. Part of it is owned by the city, and then there's a piece that's not. We all know this is the north end of your future park in this space, which is going to be a beautiful vision for that. The fire station, the city hall, and the Maitland City Center project, which ACI was very fortunate to be part of all three of those. The site, if we look at it here, is almost an acre that you currently own. And what we quickly found out is you would have to assemble the adjacent site, which is 0.35 acres here, to make it one contiguous site to be able to hold enough for the library to be possible here. This would also, as your master plan shows, be a continuation of Independence Lane all the way up to George Avenue. And that's a great vision moving forward. We also know that Horatio, there's a lot of traffic that comes from the east. So coming across here, this is going to be, as we move forward, you'll see this almost it's a pro and a con. It's a pro because we can get a lot of people by the library, but it's a con because we have to cross over Horatio to the park experience with it as a synergistic with the library. So we think we need to slow down the traffic, maybe minimize the traffic along Horatio. So this is a site analysis tool that we use when we start brainstorming what the site would be and what all its features would have. The larger arrows represent the major traffic flow along 1792. A little bit smaller arrows is the flow along the Horatio Avenue. We think this sets up to be a very important intersection of the public realm, and you can see how we have to cross over to get to the new park space. But that's okay. It happens in cities all the time when we talk about this as an urban solution on this particular site. It could be a great urban site. The library then would start to reflect and shape itself to that intersection. And you can see the great synergy between the Maitland City Center Tower, the intersection, and the new library. This particular site is not large enough to have surface parking, so we'd be recommending some type of parking garage here to help support the library. And that parking garage, since it's in your CRA, you'd be able to build it larger than what the needs are just for the library, so it could have shared use as well for that parking garage. You can see that the sunrail comes along here. We want to buffer. We always want to treat the facility to help buffer some of the sound and some of the vibration as the train go by. I think that the sunrail just happens to kiss all three of the sites you'll see as we move forward. Future expansion is pretty limited here. This is a green space. We think if you take the 2 stories, 25,000 square foot library, even up to 30,000 square feet, but when you do any kind of expansion, you're going to run out of green space on this site. It's a very, very small site, so you'd be having to use the public space of the new park here as a part of the library for any kind of outdoor reading experience. So we took that and we boiled it down to what that would actually mean for a site plan. And you can see it's very much like the actual site analysis. We would have a garage on the back side, which we've seen in many, many cities, is that any kind of book return or you could have a pull up inside the garage for that experience to be able to pick books up there from a car's standpoint. We park in the garage. You could do 3.5-story garage that would be hidden behind a 2-story building. And remember the photograph we talked about earlier. This could be a unbelievably cool 2-story glass wall atrium space as you walk in and you're looking out over the public realm, and it becomes the anchor for the north end of this particular piece of Independence Lane. But it's also, we show it, encouraging it towards the future, as your master plan shows, going all the way up to George Street. Sorry, did you have something?
Yeah, I think the interesting idea of visioning, and this is a good example of what you've already done, is if you think of an interior street between the 2 big streets, if you will, that form your north-south linear downtown and city, is that you've got a city hall and you've got a fire station one end, a park in between. You've got a classic kind of university quad or civic campus forming if you anchor the other side with the library. So the issue there is, again, if that street didn't go through, and it doesn't mean it's a problem necessarily, but it is something that would interrupt the idea of the outside area being kind of easy to just go out and enjoy. You really have a pretty strong identity of civic buildings bookending each other.
this would be a very good, exciting urban solution to your downtown.
And
We also
I,
thought it'd be fun. Sorry, go ahead.
Mike?
Yeah, if I could ask a quick question, I think you said we could jump in. So one of the downsides, perhaps, maybe not, to this string of public buildings is they kind of shut off the lights at quitting time. And so we're not getting maybe the draw in the evening time to help feed the businesses in Maitland City Center and hopefully some that'll pop up when we expand Independence Lane to the north or extend it. Is that a concern in that government buildings tend to go dark at 6 o'clock?
Good question and good observation of composition of uses. Libraries, we understand, would operate beyond the city hall hours. That would be one of the synergies that we would expect. But as a value of real estate, the value of real estate would be better positioned, depending upon how much real estate it is, for private development, or mixing other development around it, like we know, there's been, we just think if you think on the corner of Horatio and the Smith property and the church property and all of that, we believe that is a long way out, or it is not going to happen tomorrow necessarily, because of all of these parcels that have to be joined together. So that's a more complex reaction to have private sector happen right away. But by looking at the public use, it does not, the library we would hope would be open at later hours, but it does not synergize maybe as well as, quote, a retail or some other kind of function. And also having Maitland City Center there does offer, some of that concept, but as you can see, the question is there's a lot of retail already there. And once COVID goes away, we don't believe that is going to be, the destination for all retail either.
It's a great question, and anchor on what Larry was saying, we thought it would be fun to see how this might grow in the future. So we visioned a building and another garage that would help offset the parking for the church. And this building would be a liner building that would wrap around the garage, and it'd be ground floor future retail and upper floor office space. And that would help encourage, we hope, that the east side of Independence would then to fill in with those uses, with the uses you discussed.
Yeah,
So
I've libraries I've tended to see, they're generally not lively spots in the evening. Not saying that this couldn't be, but I'm just wondering if you guys weren't trying to put a library any particular place and just coming up with concepts for this area, would you say, boy, let's put a library there, or let's put some sort of mixed use commercial, retail, restaurant, and to synergize, using that word, with the rest of what we got planned along that strip?
Well, definitely, there is a stronger activation to create a mixed use downtown. To us, that's your kind of downtown core, right? So we probably would not think of the library as the major activity that would activate that space.
Okay.
Let me throw in, Mike, and that's a great question. Let me throw in an out of the box thought that is not really much out of the box. Remember, the city of Maitland owns that section of Horatio between Maitland Avenue and a proposed Independence Lane extension. Well, actually owns it all the way through to 1792. Now, that from a transportation standpoint is not a required arterial, and it jams up a lot. The ability to, should we choose, to be able to vacate that section of Horatio and add to what would be that northerly parcel, presents even greater possibilities. Just some out of the box thinking here, guys.
And I do want to comment on, sorry, I thought I was muted. I do want to comment on Mike's concern, because I know the library is open till, I think it's 9 o'clock. I wish Stacy was with us because she'd know exactly. I think they're open till 9 o'clock. And I know several nights a week there are actually meetings and activities and events going on there. And I can certainly imagine that in a non-COVID time, that after a meeting that wraps up at our 7 or 8 o'clock, people wander over to the Sanford Brewing to get a drink to decompress and discuss. You know, I also know that we go downtown to the library, the Orlando Library downtown, and sometimes on Sunday morning, the only thing open in downtown Orlando is the library. So it's drawing people to an activity in a time and a place when other businesses wouldn't be open. So I think concerning ourselves about whether or not the library is going to alienate traffic, I think we actually are realizing maybe that the library could draw its own traffic in a different way that a business is not going to do.
Yeah, well, you know, when we initially started talking about the Horatio site, I was pretty excited about it for that reason of creating a critical mass of people in the downtown area to keep these businesses afloat. And so, you know, that would be and government projects have been used to do that. I just wanted to get a full viewing of, you know, as we look at the other sites, and what the other sites could do as far as promoting more synergy with Maitland City Center, and that, as if, you know, how that would fit in. And that's sort of rambling, so I'll be quiet now.
Thank you. But these are good ideas, because what we're actually talking about here is a vision. And it's not a tomorrow vision necessarily, but it's a vision. And we have sorely lacked that in the city over the years. So thank you. Any other thoughts on that, on this particular Horatio alternative?
I just
Mayor,
want to,
just a question.
want to say I agree with Lindsay. You know, I think it'd be a good place. In fact, that's one of the things I'd like to see in the library is more meeting space. Even if I know Lindsay and I weren't here when we came up with the, you know, the thought of how big it is, but I know there's always a big demand for meeting space, and you know, this looks like a good area for it. But back to the point of open till 9 o'clock, Maitland really closes down at 10 o'clock. We're not a big, you know, hub for late night parties and bars and stuff. It's more of a laid back
Restaurant crowd.
Yes, restaurant crowd. So, yeah, I just wanted to agree with Lindsay on that.
All right. Any other thoughts before you move along, Scott?
Well, Mayor, just a question. Is there a published vision timeline for the extension of Independence?
There is not. We have, and Sharon, please correct me if I'm off base here. We have purchased land in a convoluted sort of way to allow for an extension of Independence Lane to the north, but there are flaws with that land acquisition that make it a little more problematic. So we have not gotten to that point as a council. Am I accurate, Sharon?
Yes, so we purchased the land. I think we have it in the CIP in 2024 or 2023, but mostly as a placeholder for when council decide, you know, that we are looking at it. And I think in the master plan, we put it in the short term, so maybe the 2 to 5 year timeline. Yeah.
And
do
that could,
actually-
of course, be moved up. So there's nothing, Scott, that is undoable.
We had a
And
discussion,
Mayor-
have we had discussions with that landowner about the purchase of it?
We've already purchased land. Now you're thinking about the Rueljo LLC, right?
Yes.
Not that I'm aware of.
And Mayor, did we understand you correctly that it is possible, potential exists to close down Horatio here and the library could sit right on the new park?
It
that a
is,
possibility?
it is, the county would, I believe, the county would have no objection to that. Now, remember, we own that.
Yes.
I realize that's a little bit of an out of the box thought, but if you actually look at the grid pattern, those folks that need to be able to get to Maitland Boulevard that might otherwise normally be in the morning or in the afternoon, driving that section of Horatio. There are routes, alternative routes, which are more designed for that on 1792. And so there are ways for the folks that need to get to the west side of Maitland Avenue to get there in different ways, whether it's on, Packwood or Ventress or George or Sibilia.
So, Dale, you're talking about the section of Horatio between Independence and Maitland Avenue, sort of closing that down and just creating one long longitudinal.
We own it. We can, and
I think that's an idea well worth exploring.
Yeah, and a little roundabout right there at Independence, so people can navigate pretty easily.
Yeah.
it's an interesting idea because remember, we are so tight land-wise, period. You're losing the utility of something that's important to us where it is, we can't possibly overlook.
What would we need to do in order to start some sort of a discussion on actually going forward with that as a plan? We have to do a traffic study first? Do we have, what's our first step? And I mean, it sounds like there's actually support just in this current discussion for that idea. What would we need to do next?
Well, we'd have to put on our Kevlar vest and our fireproof suits, but.
Well, in this case, you can always blame it on your mayor.
The only people who are going to object are people who don't live in our city.
Correct.
Well,
no.
I mean,
trust me, there will be people that will object because the sun came up this morning. So go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, Michael, and you're right. Would something like this need to get the wink and a nod from Orange County? Yes. Do I expect that is undoable? No.
I can tell you, I think there are going to be more than just people who don't live in Maitland that would not love this idea. I also think that, and I don't know how much time we allotted for this meeting, but we are going down a path that is going to have no end.
I agree. Yeah.
I think we've got to start moving this discussion to all the other sites because I think there's a broader discussion here at large that I think we need to start talking about. But I think is big picture, not dependent on these three sites. So I was hoping maybe we could get through these different site locations and then have a broader discussion. I also think that we need to have this discussion with some public input and in a forum that's going to allow some public input. So with that said, I think we should march on with the sites.
Well,
I agree.
And I apologize, gang, for raising the topic because it is a much broader discussion. You're right. But I felt like at least we might want to throw that in as a possibility in this discussion. But Scott, if you would, go ahead with Quinn Strong.
Yes, sir. The second site we looked at was the Quinn Strong Park site. And I think what's really dynamic and interesting about this is that it flows right out onto a 3.9 acre site, which is a park that seems to be very underutilized, and some people didn't even know it was there, but it's a real jewel and a gem when you step back inside this park and realize what the potential is. It also starts to feel like a cultural type campus because you have the history and the art center that exists there now, and the synergies that we can think of or even dream of engaging into a future library. So in this area, if we combine these three sites, we end up with 3.9 acres. And we know this is the existing Maitland Senior Center here that's being used. No one's in this building right now. You purchased that a while ago, and this is an existing parking lot that's used for the city. And you remember the art center up here, and this type of park space out here is really beautiful, and it's very large, but it is up against some residential sensitivities off to the west side. This little triangle piece just sits north of the existing library location. It's used for overflow parking, so that could be brought into this as well. When we look at some of the analysis of this, we know that there is and we looked at two different options. I'm going to show you two different options. One is where we looked at designing a new library on the south side of Quinstrong Park, and then we looked at one on the north side of Quinstrong Park. We know there's good views, good walkability to Lake Lily, and it's also good walkability to downtown. So this sits kind of in a really nice spot to connect actually those two activities, as well as the activities from the art center. You have the train coming through it, just like before, so we want to buffer that train area with, maybe that's the parking along there. If in this particular relationship, we can keep these existing buildings for the time being. They can be repurposed, and then we can redesign the park as part of the library. Some of the problems here, like I said, is that, if this is a large two-story library, we're right up against the residents here. So we thought that might be a bit of a negative going forward. So we not only looked at it here, we also looked at the north side. So let's switch now to the north side. Here we put it on the northeast corner, and we begin to get this relationship of the corner to your other public facilities, the fire station being here and City Hall here. And this could be a really dynamic look through. Can you imagine looking through this atrium type space, this two-story atrium space, and actually seeing the park beyond? So you actually feel like the park is running through the building. And we look at this as almost a gull wing type design with maybe outspilling space out back. You could have orchestra set up. You could have new park space set up. So there's all kinds of availability for the library to actually have functions outside as well as inside, because this is much more of a relaxed type setting than the urban setting we looked at a minute ago. This also has enough land, we feel, to surface park the needs of not only the park, but also the library. We can get 130 spaces on this site easily, and then future expansion can be set up along one of these gull wings pieces. And you can see this relationship and how this could possibly flow through all the way from the existing facility all the way down to the Lake Lily facility. You begin to imagine how that connectivity and that cultural campus starts to set up. We took this analysis and started putting into a floor plan and what that might look like. It's a diagram. But again, this gull wing type situation, this is all one building. I don't want you to think this is two. This is one building, and this represents the idea to be able to see straight through the building. We could set it up with a new park space, new outside activity space, lots of hardscape, some kind of feature up front, and again, the connectivity between these two. So it has a lot of pros going for it. Some of the cons are we'd have to demolish the existing buildings that are there to get this type of setup. We also looked at what if in the future we ever need to have a parking garage. We think that parking garage could be here if you needed to grow in the future, but we have it all covered with the surface.
Senior center.
And yes, the senior center that would be displaced is now actually even better to be incorporated into the library. And we know from the early slides that it's a really nice segment and a nice synergy with the seniors actually engaging with the youth within a library space. And we can build their support facility, their meeting space within the library. The next site we looked at was the Lake Lily site, and we all know this
Well,
one.
hold
what
on
it-
one second, Scott. Are there any
Yes, sir.
questions anybody has regarding the Quinn Strong site?
I got one. So I know the building's about a half is going to use about 20,000 square feet, maybe a little more. What is the total usage of that park? What are we looking at? Acre and a half?
So you have a total of 3.9 acres, what we identified in the beginning of just clear, but it's actually larger than, so this is 2.8. So this part, if you count that as all one park space, you're up to 3.5 acres, just a green space. Now you're going to take over with the parking and the new building, so maybe let's say we cut that in half by the time you get impervious areas. That's what you're asking. So you might be 2 acres of impervious and 2 acres of park.
Okay.
So that's a high level look at it right now.
Yeah, and remember, keep one thing in the back of our minds is to remember through a prior agreement, we owe Maitland City Center access to 100 public parking spaces. Could this conceivably fall within our shared parking parameters?
Well, let me ask, my other question is, if we build on this, would we be losing that usage of parkland? Would we lose that out of what we have now?
Out of our inventory?
Yes, thanks.
So right now, if you can see here, all this is surface parking, runs up here, and then we have a senior center building here and another building here. And another parking lot here. What we're proposing is a gull-wing type facility up on this corner. We would still have the parking along here, so I think you're actually getting a slightly larger park that's newly designed. So we're enhancing the experience
and activated. I think the concept of visibility for the library goes and adds to the visibility and usage and activation of the park. What was the thought? But your question is are we subtracting from the park, right?
No, no. Are we as a city losing that out of our inventory of parkland that we have? So say right now we have 20 acres of parkland. If we build on this, does that take us down to 18 acres of parkland?
No.
Well, it would still be considered parkland then.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
I understand.
Unless you, I just want to qualify. If you're counting a senior center building as parkland, then it's how you define parkland, and I don't know how you define it. But just park space is what you're asking, I thought.
Yeah.
Basically, when you're talking about impervious surface, we're repurposing existing impervious surfacing more than we're creating more. Does that make sense? So we're going to end up with basically the same amount of green as we've always had. It would just be used green and just instead of ignored green.
I don't.
Yes.
Yeah.
True,
So and then on the pros, this does provide 130 parking spaces for Maitland City Center and those areas during probably evening hours when the use isn't there as much for the park or the library. So I would throw that in as a con or a pro because I think that parking is needed in that area and
It clearly is. I agree, Mike.
Yeah. So
But we have specific code requirement for the distance or where shared parking can be, and I don't know exactly whether it's 500 or 600 feet.
Yeah, I don't know what the code is, but you just walk a block from this location, and so suddenly, and I know how concerned you were, Mayor, about how we align the parking on Independence, angled or parallel, and And that was a legitimate concern, but now we've got 130 parking spaces here. And as we plan events for the new Independence Park, I think that parking will be badly needed. So.
Well, I agree. And just that they're having to cross Maitland Avenue is my concern. And so.
Yeah, we can engineer that, I would think, but there's always an engineering solution.
Hey, Larry, would
just
you
ask
agree
any
with
engineer.
that, with what Mr. Thomas said about we're just having the same amount of impervious and pervious surface, or are we increasing our impervious?
We think it's very close to not increasing, but that would require some more, programming and studying. And Commissioner Guthrie, I think what's good about your comment is it's creating a refinement that if we were to go to the next step on any of the sites, the idea would be there would need to be a refinement of programming and in keeping all of your comments today as part of that refinement. You follow me? In other words, we haven't heard from you until now. So, but yes, the answer is we believe we can balance that with the programming and the comment that you just made about the pervious versus impervious.
Any thought of doing pervious parking?
Oh, we'll get to that
later.
We would recommend that. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
That's an insightful comment, Larry. Thank you. It is a refinement of vision, and that's very appropriate. Scott, you want to head on down south?
Yes, sir. So the next site we looked at was the Lake Lily site, and we know, and we were very cautious here because this is such a gem. It really is, and everybody just loves walking around the site. So we had to step back and just like a doctor would do, we had to say, first, we're going to do no harm to this site. And because we really feel as we analyze this, if there's too much going on here, if there's too much program, if it's too big of a building, we certainly don't want to affect the quality of people's experience walking around this lake. So that's a real driver we looked at. So if we know that the existing civic center is 2.5 acres and the existing library is 0.76. And we already talked about keeping this bar building of the library because of how beautiful it is and how historic and everybody enjoys that, not so much in the back. So we know that that's going to come into play on how we solve this piece. But moving forward, we really looked at this. We were asked to just looking at it for this point as a library only solution. So looking at that, here's the existing library here. We'd want to keep that a way to circulate traffic through here. It's not easy, but this would have to have, we cannot surface park this solution. So we need some kind of parking garage, which actually acts as a very good buffer and sound buffer for the train that rolls by. We do know we need to keep the access road because that's very important to how you set up festivals along Lake Lily. So we thought we'd bring it along here, and that really takes it away from, remember right now that access road is here, and that actually builds a barrier between your experience even at the Civic Center and walking down to Lake Lily. So we thought it was important to tuck that road behind. You get great views coming down 1792 into the site. This is one of the most dynamic views around looking across Lake Lily. So whatever we put here, we really thought the building should be angled in such a way that it actually enhances those views and reflects people looking at the building. So you get some unique geometries on this site as you come down Maitland Avenue and you come up Maitland Avenue. But this really becomes the maximum yield we feel before we start hurting the viability of this site. This is about 30,000 square feet plus the possibility to expansion. And this could have beautiful breakout park space that connects to the library and some type of a bigger Broadway kind of thing that you could have orchestras out there, you could have events out in front of the library, And again, that could be this 2-story glass curtain wall that overlooks Lake Lily, and then Lake Lily overlooks it. We took
Yes,
that
and
and we,
No, go
sorry,
ahead.
did you do something? Okay. So we started refining that more into what that might look like. And we also know, very interesting, there's some really nice fall along here. What I mean is the topography drops down to Lake Lily. So it becomes this great stage, if you will, and a backdrop, if you imagine the building as a backdrop and a stage looking out over Lake Lily. And that keeps us, there's a lot of trees down here right now, so we want to try and maintain as many of those trees as possible. By getting rid of that service road that comes here, we think it's an elegant solution for anything that goes here in the future, to tuck that service road back behind and get it out of the front of the stage. We looked at some kind of traffic circle because there's so many things happening here. People coming in, people egressing, people pulling into a garage. But this, if any site, this allows you to a little bit larger garage than we had on Horatio because of the length. So you can actually park more cars in here just because the site's a little bit longer here. And yes, single side slope. We could also look at actually using the top of the garage as part of the function space, you know, whether you use that as a green roof or whether you actually have functions on top of the garage, that could be incorporated in with a bridge across from a library. So there's many, many pros on here. But some of the cons are hard to get past is that, you have to assemble the site. There's some tricky geometries. There's a garage that needs to be built. And again, the most sensitive thing is that we do not do any harm to what beautiful Lake Lily site you have there now. Sorry, go ahead, Larry.
You want to read the cons?
Yes. So it's under the cons, we have the Civic Center landowners require agreement with the city. The timing of the purchase for the bomb referendum, we would have to displace the existing library, would have to move somewhere temporarily until this one's complete. And the shared site with the existing Civic Center reduces the area footprint of the library, we found. So this right now represents that 20 to 30,000 square foot library. So we then build a Civic Center on top of that. We feel like you're starting to use up too much of your site.
So question, go back.
So let's go back and take a pause here before we get into the analysis further. If there's any questions, Mayor, or comments.
Questions, anybody? Hearing none. Larry and Scott, go ahead.
Okay. So to wrap up this valuation, again, we talked about the 7 categories and the subcategories and the criteria that we went through. We spent a lot of time with the city administration, library input. So this is not, just our thinking. And as you go through these, and I know sometimes, this is like, when you turn in your homework to the teacher, here's my answers. And she says, well, you got the answers right, but show me how you got there. And, show me the backup. So this is the backup. And if you look across each one of these, remember that they came over and there was a relative weighting of 1 being the least important to 10 being the most important. And then the green column that's been added to that is taking on a score from 1 to 5, how well does the site meet the established criteria? So you'll see these relationships of Horatio, Quinstrong, Lake Lily, not in any specific order. We just went top north to south. And what that culminates in is the criteria being summarized. And you'll notice that in the white to the left are the categories again. Those have been transposed over for the scores and then added up. And then at the bottom, you'll see the results. And what you notice are colors. And in a business model, you would call this a heat chart, which basically starts to kind of lump together where the sites are that if you were looking at yellow, or it may look like gold there, we call it yellow, it would be the relatively better score based on the criteria. And then the red would indicate a relatively poor score. I'm sorry, green would be the relatively better score. Sorry, my fault. Yellow would be the neutral, if you will, and red would be the poor score. Now, everybody knows that when you do these types of charts or things or data that you're, trying to be quantitative, qualitative, we said. But when you get it with the weighting, the idea is that it tends to point you in a direction that gives you a pretty reliable end result. And even if you change certain criteria, it may not, just easily change something. But this is meant to be a tool for you all. This is not meant to say that somebody has got the wrong answer or the right answer. And our biggest hope is that we have given you enough information to consider the purpose behind this and consider what is important for you to decide to do with it. So our goals and sensitivities here is at the final slide. We just thought it would be important to try to sum up the whole thing. And it's great to see you all engaged already and very well engaged, we think. But, we know that there's some serious problems with the library, and it's not just the building. It lacks the land and the flexibility. We think you should preserve, there should be preservation. I think it'd make a fantastic repurposed building with the historic two sets of the first building and the addition. Flexibility is the key, and we have to think long-term here about flexibility. And in a 21st century library, the design today, it's not just about how big the floor plate is in the site. It's really about how much use can we create by not being controlled by where columns are, where mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems are, where technology is. How do we make that if you will, whatever it needs to be? The post-COVID libraries of the future have already been accelerated by the pre-COVID directions that the future libraries were headed. So it's actually an affirmation that the engagement of libraries are going to be very much driven. We heard you say it. It's very true, by the way, that meeting rooms and meeting spaces, again, flexible, are used for all kinds of reasons. It isn't just the seniors. It's all kinds of places for people to come, do business, meet, collaborate, both inside and outside. And it really should be a platform for not just the books and knowledge. The libraries are much more than that. And they need to have some kind of community space, we think, synergistic with that. And then we've tried to use what we think are the best practice methods today to not just say, oh, hey, we're ACI, this is what we think. It's really based on the criteria. And I think one thing that we think you triggered that we never thought of is that you're talking about public land, you're talking about your community, one of your greatest assets is your library. And you also talked about a public anchor capability in your master planning and visioning. Now, visioning only goes forward if you can identify and act together on the possibilities. And then for it to be a reliable vision, it can't be just an opinion, it needs to be data driven. And then last, you need to have leaders that are willing to act on that. And so what we think you've done is if you took the library for a minute and thought of it as a part of other things that may evolve in Maitland, we think that it could become part of this synergistic cultural campus where the library could go Quinstrong Park or not. But if you do think of the Lake Lily site as very special, not that it's necessarily, it should be the only site, but it is a very special site. We think you should expand your vision into the other things that we heard mentioned, wellness. If you think of community centers and civic centers transforming today what's going on, and putting that much program on any one site with a library is virtually impossible if you use the program requirements for the library. So the idea of setting in motion this expanded vision of library and cultural campus and continue the vision forward as you go forward, is a fantastic way for Maitland to continue to grow in that direction. So with that, we know that we're just a consultant, and if anything goes wrong, we're the ones that get fired. So don't think that we think anything you say is offensive.
This will be your shot, everybody. I have questions. Oh, wow. That's surprising. Okay, Larry, I want to thank you all. These concepts, which actually are, visioning exercises for all of us. And it's extremely helpful to think about the opportunity for there to be not all of these community uses in one building, but may be able to be in a library, in a community center, whatever it may be, is a terrific idea that provides residents, the maximum utility that we could possibly need for the next 40 or 50 years. And I want to thank you again. Anybody else have any comments for Larry or Scott?
Well, are we going to discuss these, or are we just going to sign out and talk about this later?
Well, I'm up. You know me. I'll meet all day long. We might let, if you actually have any questions, we can discuss this. I believe we're being streamed. I don't know if any of you have any time parameters that you need to work with.
Well, I know Mike and Lindsay have real jobs. I was just curious about a summation about how people feel and where do we go from here? Where does the staff go from here? And maybe this isn't the time for that.
Well, we're not going to be taking votes today, but I understand your point, Mike. I like the idea of us discussing the relative merits of different alternatives. So if it's the council's pleasure, Mike, if you or Lindsay need to get away, we'll miss you. But maybe we'll hang around and chat a little bit.
Yeah, I can stay. I've got a 1:30, but I can definitely stay till then. So.
Well, since you got a 1:30, Mike, why don't you give your impressions first?
Yeah, you're up.
My impressions are that I think that the sites that, or the pros and cons of each site were sort of dictated by the fact that this building has taken on a lot. It's a big building. It's a big project that we're kind of trying to take on with this.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the library building that we're going to construct in the near future has to serve every single one of those purposes, or if this is something that can be staged. I say that because I think that we're facing a time where we're going to have to start making choices. And I don't know if building this big of a structure all at once is the choice that the residents want us to make at this time. So I think that I think we should look at how we could potentially work at this in phases and start to plan things. I think that one of the criticisms I've heard from people is that we've left some projects unfinished and we've left some promises unfulfilled. And so before we start taking on a massive new project, I think there are things that are in the queue that probably still need our attention. And that doesn't mean that we don't ignore this or don't start planning or don't start building phases. But I do think that we have to be cognizant of the fact that we were going to have to make choices before, and we're certainly going to have to make tougher choices now from a budget standpoint. So I think that we should be looking at that while we're looking at all these sites and evaluating what is it that needs to be done near term, what would be the next phase, what would be the idea from a planning standpoint, because I think all of these, the vision of downtown is more than just this library, obviously, but it's an important part of it. So how can we incorporate the library into the future, and how do we start planning for a comprehensive downtown plan that this library is a part of? So that's, my thoughts are that we need to do something, but I also don't know that we need to do this big of a structure all at once. And I think there are projects that would be going along with this library. And depending on the site that's selected, there's bigger parts of this that would go. And so we would need funds for those projects as well. So that's just and I also think, by the way, that we need to have some public input on this. We've been saying, for as long as we've been talking about this, we've been saying we need to get the public to have a voice in this. And so at some point before we really start discussing the merits of these sites and what we do with the old building, and I think we need to start having some way to collect general public information and input.
Yeah, Mike, I agree. There will be about 11 community meetings before we do anything.
Mr. Mayor, this
Yes,
is Larry. I didn't want to interrupt, but I did want to point out that Sharon asked us about with COVID and all the things going on, and I really appreciate the commissioner's comments or councilman's comments. I just wanted you to know that we think that is a huge issue or a huge need, and we have provided a process that we are finding very successful, and we've submitted that concept to, not for you to decide today. I just wanted you to know that we have thought about that, and there's a process you can look at.
Yeah, let me ask you a quick question, Larry, because you referred to in your analysis timing. Were there any particular time parameters that were given to you by staff?
Well, the main timing issue was the idea of this process would potentially lead to a preference of a site, because until you have a site and you have like it's being talked about, what Mike said, you have a real program. Because you really haven't taken that step. It's not wise to go spend a lot of money until you have that, and the last part of the community engagement. So that timing was looking at the possibility of trying to hit a bond referendum date for next year, when it would go on the ballot. So
in March
here I'm sorry, in March. But the thought here is what are the next steps? And the next steps, there are next steps that, you don't get from a vision to a project until you actually go in and generate the data and the refinements with what you all are talking about. And I think it's important to make progress, to answer those questions, which is normal, by the way. But that was the timing question. And the ownership of the Civic Center obviously it sets up complexity in the fact that if it is a shared use building, the project only gets bigger, and you really can't fit all that program on the site there with a big garage. So, and I'll stop talking.
Right. Thank you, Larry.
I think that this goes to the point that we've got to look at this, I think, globally about the downtown, because where this site goes, where the library goes, it does depend on how you would develop other things. So if it's located in one area, it has an impact. If it's located in another area, it has a different impact. So I think that looking at this in a vacuum without looking at it in total of the downtown vision, I think we need to look at, if we put the library here, then where would we put parking if we're not providing parking as part of a library project? If we are going to put it here, then what does it do with traffic flow and pedestrian traffic mobility around downtown? So I think that as we look at this, we should be looking at not just the library, but what that means for the downtown core as a whole.
You're exactly right. I appreciate that, Mike, because you are right. And one other thing that we want to consider, and I'm appreciative of all of you for participating this way, because we are in effect sending a message to the market at large that the city of Maitland is willing to invest in itself. And that's an important message to get out there. Any other thoughts?
I'll weigh in. As far as the funding and other priorities, and you could list any number of them: sidewalks, parks, utilities. This would sort of be its own separate revenue source approved by the voters. So whether or not the library is approved or not approved, I'm not sure how funding for that would affect other projects, because it would be basically a set aside bump in the millage rate designed specifically for that purpose. And the residents would weigh in on this. So this wouldn't be something that we're kind of doing on the sly or not engaging our residents in, because they would have the ultimate say. They would vote on it. There would be yard signs, there would be discussions on Facebook. So I think this would have a full public vetting, and I think people would decide, well, do I want to pay whatever 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 mils to build this or not? And so that's how I think that would go. As far as the locations, I kind of started this process out leaning towards Horatio, and now when I look at how many boxes we check, Quinn Strong just starts to come way out in front. In my view, it's already sort of government property. It's basically over 3 acres of dead space that we don't have any plans to do anything with. It resolves the senior center, which never has has been a cultural hub. The campus feel that they're talking about fits in exactly with the Art and History Center, so it creates that little hub. And so we have sort of our little spot of culture and sophistication. We've got space there for kids to go out and for nighttime library events and do astronomy. And so that doesn't box anything else out. That kind of uniquely fits that use. So, and then the parking for the downtown, you could do it quickly. And then the CRA, and we talked to staff about this before, and they've talked to Orange County, and I know the guys at Orange County, and I can prod them too. But if we got this site included in the CRA, and we could use CRA funds for part of it, and we're allowed to repurpose or decide what we want to use CRA funds for with just a vote. So we could offset some of the expense of this. And then as far as if we want to do this, we could sell that to residents as well. The apartments are paying for, a third of it, and local businesses are paying for a third of it, and you're paying for a third of it. And whatever those numbers are, you could create a sellable package if we want the library. And if you could, the way to do this is to create a clearly defined project with clearly defined cost, and show that for their money they're getting a good deal. So that to me is, if our priority is to get this thing done, and probably what I think will be the best long-term location. Otherwise, what are we going to do with all that property? I know Vance talks about a park. What it is just an empty field that nobody uses.
Unless it became pickleball courts.
we could do that. So anyway, I've gone on to
Fastest growing sport in America.
Yeah. So I'll back out now, but they're all good sites. I think they were very objective and analyzed them well. So and with that, I'll
Thank you, Mike.
hit the done speaking button.
Yep. Vance, Lindsay, you have any thoughts before you guys need to scoot?
I'll let Lindsay go ahead. She has a little tighter schedule than I do.
I've got time. My emails are just doing their thing over here. I'm watching them. But I appreciate it. I'm concerns going on in my mind. Things I'm thinking about is which of the sites is going to be going to pose the least amount of resistance to, let's say, hypothetically and optimistically, that the voters approve going forward with one of these plans and we get the funding we need to do it. Which of these sites is going to provide us, and this is a direct question for Larry and Scott, which of these sites is going to provide us with the easiest opportunity to get a library up and running as quickly as possible? Because I am thinking directly about the current library's infrastructure issues, the library employees who are working in that building right now, and the very real situation that they have current costs that will need to be outputted on certain things like air conditioners. And if we're going to delay further maintenance, I want to know which one of these is going to get us to a library quickest.
Well, if we look at it, let me answer that black and white from one angle. Is there's only one in the mix of three that don't require additional land purchases, and that's Quinn Strong. And now, not knowing how quick you can assemble land for the other ones, that would be our answer from looking at it from that particular criteria.
Okay, and we literally only just need to tear down the senior center, right? That's the only thing that's sort of impeding.
Right. Yes, I think we also feel that the corner option is the better option of a presentation, and also to create as much and maintain as much parkland as possible. So the idea of, that you bought that site on the corner, right? So you own that. So we would assume that would be where the program would go. And I think the idea of being able to define Councilman Thomas said, create a clearly definable project. I'd say that site would be the easier one to deal with.
I'm also worried though that the one thing that concerns me about the Quinn Strong, and this is, we do a lot of walking around Maitland, and I've walked along Maitland Avenue numerous times, and that is a really tricky area right there with those train tracks crossing the road in terms of pedestrian access and people crossing Maitland Avenue. We would have to redo that entire intersection, I think. I don't think that we'd be serving our residents if they couldn't get there because Maitland Avenue and the train tracks cause such a problem at that intersection.
That's true.
So we'd be in for redesigning or somehow fixing that road.
That we own.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we own it, but we have to also costs and other infrastructure, right? Like we'd have to fix it.
Well,
so you're talking about this intersection, making this more pedestrian friendly, and then this road, are you speaking about Packwood right here to fix that?
Maitland Avenue.
The crossing.
Maitland Avenue. The crossing here.
I agree with Lindsay. That's a tricky way to get over there. I've parked over that way when going to the downtowns, and it's not easy to navigate that. And there's one section, I don't know if it's right there, where cars actually drive onto the tracks and get stuck. I saw that one day.
It's because the two lanes go down to one, and people in the left turn lane try to merge right into it. There's a set of lights up at Horatio, so people are speeding because Packwood's not a major intersection. Trying to cross there at the crossing at the stripes, at the zebra stripes, is dangerous.
You guys have an idea on that.
The one thing about Packwood is, it's not like a regular street where you come up to almost the curb and then cross. You have to set back, way back, and then you have to look way to your north, way to your south, and then jot across it.
Yeah,
there's a concern there, especially with the railroad tracks. To me, also, you're correct.
Horatio.
But one thing, and I'm glad you brought that up. We were sensitive to that, and we actually have 3 entry points when we looked at here. So you have an entry here off of Maitland, you have an entry off of Packwood. You also have the 3rd entry down here off of Ventress. So of all the sites, this one actually has 3 different directions that you could come from to get to the site. We also felt like the majority of, and it's not to exclude anybody in Maitland, but the majority of the walkable residents, this site and the Lake Lily site actually became most of the people we felt were going to walk or bike from actually the west side in a way.
You're excluding everybody on the other side of Horatio, all of the apartments at 400 North, Maitland City Center, Versailles, Minnehaha, we all walk. And with that train track.
Right.
Yeah, I think I said, thank you. I was trying to say not to exclude others, but we felt like there was a connection.
Well, if we flip it the other side, you know, we realize no matter where we go, that the existing barriers, if you will, to walkability, bikeability, whatever, are going to apply to residents no matter where we put it. So we agree with you on all of it. It was, and the fact that you're pointing this particular point out, I think we do have infrastructure issues that need to be solved anyway. The idea, whether it's Horatio or wherever we put it, but the idea was that's probably the biggest idea that would need to be looked at quickly. Lindsay, you know, in other words, don't just assume that works, is what you're saying.
Right. The building directly across the street on Packwood, as Vance was pointing out, you have to almost jut yourself into the intersection to be able to see around that thing to cross Packwood, or sorry, to cross Maitland Avenue. I realize the site itself is a great site because of the amount of parceling of the land all together in one place. But as an actual site, if we have this vision of Independence Lane being a long rambling walkway where people can go from one end to the other and to access, be the artery of downtown Maitland. Well, the artery of downtown Maitland to get to the library and the art center and all of that valuable, important cultural center has this train track in the way, which we can't fix, but but this would put one of the most important parts of our cultural center on the opposite side of a very dangerous and unmovable object.
Right. Lindsay, one thing you just said that I think is really important is that if you take Horatio, if you think about the civic component inside the core, right? Because there's a lot of density going on, right, in that location. The idea of the library, let's say that's where it went ahead, and we have that, and it matches. It goes, it has a complementary ability potential with the future. We think the future is pretty far out there. We know that there's complexity, and that's part of anything. The thing that we also want to remember is that for a while, you probably would just see the library. And I'm saying, so it would be in our thought process here is that can we be synergistic enough? And we do know that park space is more community oriented outside space versus urban. I mean, you have urban parks too. You have one right across the street on Horatio. But the idea is does that fit the idea of Maitland's community space? And we thought the park had some attributes that one didn't. But it's not like one site is the only site. I don't want you to think we're pushing.
No. And I'm not. I'm just suggesting that any version of this will require a major traffic study for that intersection, because if we don't solve that problem, we're making it unwalkable for everybody east of it.
The most important thing we'd like to leave with you, I think, just our little role here, is that there is more definition needed, regardless of almost what happens, to really define the library program. Mm-hmm. But you've made comments today that would affect, especially Michael did, on the idea of is there a way for this to begin at whatever location and have some kind of phasing? I would say it isn't that easy, because you have to still meet the requirements. But I would say that until you get a defined program, it's really hard to, go further and do a design without a site.
Yeah. Lindsay, any more thoughts?
I think I'm tapped out.
All right. Vance, you out there,
Yeah,
man.
and Larry, I
man.
agree with you about, you have to have your site really before you can start thinking about what you're going to build. But in my lifetime, I've really never seen anything piecemeal that came out to be something fantastic or great.
Right.
So I really can't get behind that thought of piecemealing it together.
Right.
I think we're all in agreement. Public input is necessary. I'm a big fan of it. Doing workshops, getting our citizens involved. I mean, really, they're putting their thoughts into it. They're putting their blood into it. Their ideas. It really becomes our citizens' library at that point. It's not Orange County saying it's going to look like this. Back to your point of that's the great thing about us having a library is it's our library, and we can design it and the functions that we need in it, and our citizens can give us that direction. That being said, with everything going on, with us selecting an area, cost, whatever it is, and doing the workshops and vetting this out, do we really see March as a time that we'll be able to go forward and put this out for a vote? Or is that too close to count?
Our side of it was the schedule is we would take the next, assuming that happened and go forward, fairly quickly here. That would take, about to complete everything about a month or about 3 weeks but pulling it all together, bringing it back and pushing it forward, it is closing down on the time, but the process does need to be done correctly. And we think we would need a month. We don't think we need any more than that.
Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
What would you have in a month? What would we tell you to do, and then what would you produce in a month that we could move forward with a referendum?
We'd move forward with the workshops.
Go ahead.
I think
okay.
we'd work forward with the workshop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that we don't.
Never mind.
We don't think it should be design it and then show the public. The key is that, first of all, as we all know, the client here is every citizen and resident in Maitland.
And kids not born.
Right. So that's what we meant by the month.
Okay, gotcha. Go ahead.
I think I'm pretty well done. Go ahead, Mike. And if I hear something that you're talking about, I'll jump in after you.
Well, as far as the time frame and getting back to Lindsay's concern and my concern is, how much longer can we keep patching together the existing library with duct tape and extension cords until it's just no longer tenable. I mean, I don't want to sink $500,000 into a new HVAC system if we're going to be looking at moving out of there, in a couple of years. So if there's any urgency to a referendum, it would be that. It would be to invest money instead of throwing good money after bad, just spend good money. As far as the phasing, I don't know how you could do phasing with a referendum. It seems you just have to ask for the WAD and and build it rather than go through a first phase and a referendum and then a second phase referendum. But so that would be moving forward with that. And I don't know, Sharon, if we were going to put this on the March ballot, when would be the drop dead date for having our ducks in a row and calling Bill Cowles and doing that?
December.
Very true. Anybody have any further thoughts or questions? I'll spare you mine. I do want to thank Larry and Scott both for providing us with a vehicle that allows us to both get some quality and quantitative analysis done and take some of the emotion out of this. There is, that allows us to make better choices and have the opportunity in community meetings and community input to be able to explain it and ask and answer questions more logically. So again, I want to thank you both for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other questions or comments? We're sneaking up on 1:42 and appreciate the indulgence, everybody.
I have a question about where you want to go. Do you want this on the next council agenda to vote about moving forward or not? At some point I have to have a decision, or wherever you want to go with it. And I know you're not making a decision today. So is that where we're headed, to put it on a green sheet and on a legislative report?
I don't believe we're ready to do that yet. Because I think part of the process will be community input, even on locations.
Well, if that's the way you want to go, then what I'm saying is then Larry and Scott can put something together. If you want to start with location for public input, if that's where you all want to go. I just don't want it to linger.
I would be fine with that. Let's go ahead and start getting the public and introduce this and getting some input. I agree with Dale. I think even we can sit here and we can make the hard decision, but it'd be nice to hear from the public even on that. What would they like it?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
In order to put this forward we obviously have to know how much money we need to be asking the residents to be willing to pay for. Is there any sort of sense that when these 3 designs were created or in this process that we'd be looking at roughly the same amount of money for each one? Or is the design really contingent upon us choosing a site because it's going to cost X number of dollars more or less depending on where we put this?
If I could, you need 3 things in order to do something that involves a bond referendum or public money. And I'm simplifying it, I know. But one is you need a program so you know exactly what it is you're building, what's going into it. Nobody wants to spend unless they see it. So they need a visual representation of that rendering mentality. And then last, they need to know exactly what it's going to cost. And, we're not going to let something like this. The last one is everything. Okay. So that's why the requirements have to be defined. So when we say between now and December 2020 to get to a March 2021 referendum, those 3 things would be produced. But the other thing that drives all of this, and we've never done a project without it, just so you know, we are big believers in this, is what Vance said was the public input. And what's great about that is that I think there is a way to do it where I think we will learn I think we'll all be positively impressed with what we'll learn from what we do with that. But that needs to come. I mean, we would agree that needs to come next.
Can I add something?
Yes.
Of course. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think what you were asking is there's something inherent about the sites? Well, yes. Okay. So one, anytime you see a parking garage, that drives up the cost. So surface parking is cheaper. So when the other 2 sites, Quinstrong does not require a parking garage, the other 2 do, and that's significant cost. Now if there's going to be an intersection improvement here, obviously that would be an additional cost, but you'd also be doing that on Horatio.
Right.
And then the other thing is that we would have to buy the land on Horatio between us and Independence Lane. We don't own it. And I think we have an agreement to purchase it, but we would have to actually pull that trigger. And then, of course, the Civic Center, we don't own it, so I don't know what the cost would be or whether we work something, that's TBD.
So Larry, what are you thinking? Like webinars or something to that?
We provide. Yeah, let me give you. If you, I've got it here. We've done this. It's interesting. We all think that how crazy this is, but what we're finding is there's a lot going on that's going to continue with virtual meetings and things. We like to create three different avenues. One would be groups of 10 or less, and we would spread those out, and we could meet either at the library or at the City Hall using all the COVID standards, requirements, state of Florida and federal, and allow people to come in and basically have a dialogue with exactly what you kind of seen here today in a way that allows for public input. That's one. Number two, we would certainly want to have opportunities for that to be communicated through the schools, where, and through the city website, and have ability for that to interact with a survey, which the problem with surveys is you don't get to have direct dialogue. So, and then there would be times during the day, ACI would be available to have people also, participate in virtual meetings. So this interaction can't just be, here, we'll send it out to everybody. What do you think? So we're seeing this interactions that we just described, and I've got a detail on it. I'll send it to each of you, and would love your input.
And Mayor, I think it's important to point out too, in order to make a December deadline, I don't think we could have workshops just on a site, get that done, then have workshops on program and design. I think those two have to come together. So these workshops are talking about program and site at the same time in order to make that deadline.
User requirement. User. So
these are all great questions.
Vance, let me just summarize that real quickly. In person by reservation, we talked about small groups. Online survey is the second item, and then the website interactions to get the word out so that we have good attendance. And we would do 10. We were thinking at least 10 of these with the in-person by reservation over a couple of weeks or 3 weeks period, so people have an opportunity. And we would also encourage that the library have their teen advisory boards. We don't want it to just be adults. We really want, the younger crowd in this.
Great.
And that's who we're doing this for. Okay, any other thoughts? Again, thank you, Larry and Scott. This gives us, plenty of meat on the bone to gnaw on here. So maybe a March, deadline is the right time. Maybe it's not. So let's make sure that whatever we do it right the first time. How about that? So
yep.
That because all of this is going to cost a lot of money and speak volumes about who Maitland is. And again, we don't get to make that impression just the first time. Okay.
Right.
Any other thoughts?
Okay. Just to follow up on Vance's comment, I would eagerly support us moving this forward with all due speed and efficiency, because I think that we don't have any more time to wait.
I'm on board with that.
We're at a budget time, so we got a lot going on between now and September 14th. But so let's. I understand. That gives you some direction, Sharon. Does that give you some insights into your question?
Not really. So are you?
I think the question is back to us, which is what do we want to do? I mean, that's
if you are wanting to, and again, the March deadline doesn't have to be you can do the referendum, you can do a mail-in ballot. There's lots of other options. It just costs a little more, but you can do you can ask the question anytime you want, or you could wait till March of 2022. But at least I would like to keep it moving. So if the desire is to have public input on the site and not just the programs, but go through a site public input and then a program public input, then I need to bring something forward to council to approve. I don't have any money for the next step. And I'd want to make sure that it isn't my scope of services, but it's what you guys actually want to receive back from ACI, if that's who you choose to go with. Larry's given me what he believed the next step is. And so I would want to put that on the agenda for a decision, not on consent, for you guys to discuss if that's, that's the kind of program, public input program you want to move forward with.
Could we get Stacy to give us a itemized list of all of the current services that are offered by the library and all of the things that they currently do? And then we can kind of use that list to gauge whether we want to add or subtract from that with the new library.
I respectfully, Lindsay, I don't know that with a new facility, I think all that could be changing. So I'm a little uncomfortable wanting to fashion a new facility around what we do today in this structure.
But there's certain things our residents already expect from us, right? Like they expect.
I think our residents will tell us what they want at these workshops.
And if I can say it to Mike, I think when I was saying that we're going to have to make choices, and what I was trying to do is get to what Lindsay's point. I think we need to identify what the priorities are and know what we need to do. And what I don't want to do is rush something and not do it the right way. Or if we can only afford to do X amount of the project, I want to put it in the scope of the larger project. That's what I'm trying to say is let's not shortchange ourselves on the whole bigger project and the whole vision of downtown, because we need to fill an immediate need of the library. So if there's ways we can look at this in the total vision of the downtown, I think that would benefit us. And I think that, but I do think we need to start moving this forward. We need to start putting things on agendas. We need to then start having.
Did I lose you?
Yeah,
I can't agree with can't agree more with Michael about that exact concept. So again, we're not in a hurry to do something wrong.
Yeah. And I think what we should do, we have 3 sites. We've got a great presentation here. I think that we can start putting this on firm agendas and start to put together a timeline that gets us to a decision. And if it's the pleasure, and if what we want is to, let's say by the end of the year, have a decision made, then I think we should start asking staff to put together a prospective timeline. And then maybe at the next meeting, we vote or whatever the procedure would be on that timeline to move this forward. So what would we want to see? What kind of community meetings are we recommending? How would we conduct those community meetings given this current situation?
Yeah.
I think we're going to be, by the way, I've had lots of people stop me on walks. I think we're going to be it's going to be interesting to get the feedback, because I can tell you more people have told me that they think that the existing library is such a gem and we need to make sure we preserve that, than are questing for a new library space. So I think they recognize that there's a need for a rehabilitation or a new library or whatever. They do also appreciate the history of that one part of that building. So it's going to be I think we're going to get an interesting feedback from the public when we go out for it. But I do think that we should start scheduling this and start getting firm dates on a calendar, give firm objectives and direction to staff so that they know what we want. And I mean, my proposal would be now is to say that we should try to have a decision by the second meeting. Well, we don't usually have a second meeting in December, but by the first meeting in December, we would have then a plan and a vision of where this is going to go, and a vote on whether or not this is going to go to referendum or not. And that we should ask for a calendar from staff at the next meeting that we would look at, that would call for public input, and then hard dates for the meetings that would lead up to that December call it 10th vote. That would be my suggestion.
I'm loving the sound of this commitment, guys. I'm proud of all of you. That's exactly right. The opportunity to provide this city some pride of ownership in what and who we are, what we are, where we are. This is an opportunity to manifest that. So let's include everybody. Any other thoughts?
Does the library board play any role in this, or we just?
I am on the meeting, yes.
Okay.
All right. Any other thoughts, questions? Hearing none, we'll let everybody get headed out. It's right at 2. I appreciate everybody participating today. Thank you again.
Mucho
Good
aloha, y'all.
discussion. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
guys.